You want your glasses?
Why did you celebrate at a French restaurant last night? Was that a symbolic gesture?
Thanks, Administrator Pruitt. Earlier this morning, the May jobs report was released showing that Americans seeking jobs are having more success finding them than at any point in the last 16 years. There's a lot of positive signs coming out of the job market. Over 600,000 private sector jobs have been added since the president took office. The key U6 unemployment rate, which gives a broader look at both unemployment and underemployment, fell a full percentage point since the president took office in January. Long-term unemployment is down by 187,000 since the president took office, and America's miners and drillers are getting back to work, with that sector showing job growth for the seventh straight month. The president's not going to stop until every American who wants to work can find meaningful employment. That's why we're working tirelessly on policies that will keep the economy growing, with a tax plan that will leave more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans and making it easier for businesses to thrive, an infrastructure initiative that will generate $1 trillion of investment and put Americans back to work, rebuilding our nation's crumbling roads and bridges, repealing and replacing the job-killing Obamacare with a system that encourages competition and drives prices down, and a systematic regulatory reform to reduce unnecessary burdens on manufacturing and other key industries, aiming for the most far-reaching rollback since the Reagan years. You can expect the president to be focusing even more on jobs this month and holding events in Washington and outside, pushing his pro-growth, pro-jobs agenda. Later this afternoon, the president's going to be signing two bills that were both passed with bipartisan support that help protect those who protect us, our nation's veterans and public safety officers. First, the Public Safety Officers Benefit Improvement Act of 2017, which was co-sponsored by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. It was unanimously passed by the Senate last month. It will reduce the unacceptable backlog of families awaiting approval of survivor benefits and public safety officers that were killed in the line of duty. The second is the American Law Enforcement Heroes Act, which was co-sponsored by Senator John Cornyn and Senator Amy Klobuchar, which also unanimously passed the Senate and assists state and local law enforcement in adding veterans to their forces by prioritizing the Department of Justice funding to law enforcement agencies that is used to hire veterans. It's critical that we support our veterans and the loved ones of those who have paid the ultimate price while protecting our communities. The president's glad to be signing these important bills today, and there'll be a pool spray at the top of that shortly. Also in Washington today, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos visited the Eagle Public Charter School this morning to show the administration's support for inclusive school environments and celebrate the launch of the Department of Education's new Individual with Disabilities Act effort. At the State Department, Secretary Tillerson met this morning with Foreign Minister of Brazil and is departing for Sydney, Australia this afternoon, where he will join Defense Secretary Mattis to participate in the 2017 Australia-United States ministerial consultations. Prior to his arrival in Australia, Secretary Mattis will attend the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, where he will deliver remarks and meet with regional allies and counterparts to discuss security issues. With that, I'd be glad to take a few questions. Kevin.
Thanks, Sean. I want to ask about the push for the travel ban to the U.S. Supreme Court. Is it fair to say that one of the reasons that the president wants to keep this going is obviously now we have a full court impaneled, but also because it gives the White House perhaps a chance to build on some momentum, especially if you look back at yesterday, it would appear that his base was very pleased with what the president decided to do. Is that part of the calculus? And I'd also like to ask as a follow about the XL pipeline. Can you give us an update on what's happening with that in terms of jobs and development?
Yeah. I think that what we've said with respect to the executive order in question has been fairly consistent since its implementation and in the first court action. So last night we asked the Supreme Court to hear this important case and are confident that the president's executive order is well within his lawful authority to keep the nation safe and protect our communities from terrorism. The president's not required to admit people from countries that sponsor or shelter terrorism, and until he determines that they are properly vetted and do not pose a threat or risk to the United States. It's pretty consistent with what we've talked about. I don't have an update on, are you talking about in terms of production for Keystone? I don't have that at this time. Zeke?
Thanks, John. You were asked earlier this week about the president's personal views on climate change and whether or not he believes it's a hoax. You said you hadn't had a chance to have that conversation with him. Now it's been 48, 72 hours. What does the president actually believe about climate change? Does he still believe it's a hoax? Could you clarify that, since apparently nobody else in the White House can?
Yeah, I have not had an opportunity to have that discussion. Like,
the American people deserve to know what the president believes on such
I
an
think
important
that
issue.
Administrator Pruitt pointed out that what the president is focused on is making sure that we have clean water, clean air, and making sure that we have the best deal for the American workers. Blake.
Sure.
Sorry.
No worries. Quick question for you on related to the Paris Climate Agreement. Why does the president feel it's important to continue to reduce carbon emissions and export clean energy technology?
I think he understands the importance of clean air, clean water, as I just mentioned, and a healthy environment, but also doing so in a way that provides the American workers and our economy a way to grow. But obviously, as Administrator Pruitt pointed out, that we've got a lot of technology that we can export to other countries and help them.
Just a quick question as it relates to climate change. The very simple definition of climate change is a change in the Earth's weather patterns. The EPA administrator said today that he does feel there is some value to the studies that say that the Earth is warming somewhat. Does the president share the EPA administrator's thoughts on this topic? And why has the administration sort of backed away from using the words climate change?
I have not, as I mentioned, Ezekiel, I have not had an opportunity to specifically talk to the president about that. Amen.
Thanks, Sean. Yesterday, the president painted a pretty dire economic picture if the United States were to stay in the Paris Accord, saying it would be disastrous for the U.S. economy. And yet, dozens of the top CEOs of American corporations lobbied the president in order to stay in the Paris Accords. Why would the president argue that this is bad for the economy if all of those CEOs are saying, you know what, we need to do this? Is the president right about the economic forecast and all those private sector leaders wrong?
I think the president took input from a lot of individuals, and there were other sectors that were very concerned about the implementation of it. And frankly, I think there were some companies and some organizations that are among those that you mentioned that while they maybe wanted to stay in, also expressed concern about the target levels. But at the end of the day, the president's #1 priority is to get the best deal for the American people. This is who they elected last year. This was, I think, one of the things that we've got to remember is that the president was very clear on the campaign trail about his position on this, but he was also clear that he was going to negotiate the best deal for the American people. And if you look at all of the deals that we have, whether the trade deals or Paris, the president's made it very clear that he's committed to getting the best deal for America, America's workers, America's manufacturers.
Is Johnson going to replace Elon Musk and Bob Iger on the President's Advisory Council?
I don't know at this point. Jim.
Thank you, Sean. The president's critics are claiming that the, pulling out of the accord will lift China as a global leader. Do you agree with that sentiment? What does the White House have to say about that?
Well, I think part of the reason that the president said it was a bad deal yesterday is because countries, including China, were not making substantial progress in reducing their carbon footprint. They weren't doing enough, and America was carrying the load. So I think by negotiating a better deal, hopefully we can get a better result for our country and the world. John.
Thank you, Sean. Yesterday, President Macron of France delivered a sharply worded speech in English attacking the president on the climate change decision, saying it is bad for all of our children, and he specifically called on scientists to come and move to France. What's the president's response to President Macron?
I think that the president has made it clear since day one that his job is to protect the interest of this country and our citizens. As he said yesterday, he was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. Hunter.
Thank you, Sean. The Washington Post has reported that the administration is considering returning these properties in Maryland and New York to Russia. What is the reason for that, and what would the White House have to see before giving back those properties?
The State Department issued comments on that earlier, saying, quote, the U.S. and Russia have reached no agreements. They're projecting the negotiations further along than they are. So the State Department's the lead on that. They've been very clear where we stand on that. Charlie?
Has the president been following the Kathy Griffin meltdown, and does the family want a personal apology for the beheading photo?
Does what, please?
Does the family want a personal apology from Kathy Griffin
I think
after the beheading photo?
Yeah, the president, the First Lady, and the Secret Service have all made it very clear their view on those thoughts. Steve?
Sean, it's been a matter of curiosity in this town for a couple of days now. Is the White House going to invoke executive privilege to prevent James Comey from testifying before the Senate Intelligence Panel next week?
That committee hearing was just noticed, and I think obviously it's got to be reviewed.
So that is not a no.
No, it's just saying literally, my understanding is the date for that hearing was just set. I have not spoken to counsel yet. I don't know how they're gonna respond. Jen.
Two questions, Sean. One on the tax bill and one on the debt ceiling. In the Rose Garden yesterday, the president said something about our tax bill is moving along in Congress very well. We've heard something about a bill being drafted in House Ways and Means. Is that what he was talking about, or what tax bill was he referring to?
I think, as you know, Secretary Mnuchin and Director Cohen were here a couple weeks ago laying out the broad principles of what they look to see in legislation. They've had several discussions, both in the House and the Senate, bipartisan and industry groups, and I think that the reception that the President's initiative has received in both chambers is moving along very well with leadership and rank and file members.
And then on the debt ceiling, we've been getting some mixed messages from administration officials on whether you'd like to see a clean debt bill or whether you'd be, can you explain what the President's feeling is on whether he'd like to see riders attached on decreasing spending or whatever? What is his feeling?
I think both Secretary Mnuchin and Director Mulvaney have weighed in on this. This is something that we're going to work with Congress on. So we're not there yet. It's something that our team is going to continue to work with them on. Jessica.
Thanks, John. Two questions. Number one, when we heard the administrator talk about this decision on the Paris Climate Accord, he said it's not a signal that the U.S. wants to disengage on climate policy. So what are the steps that the administration is taking to engage internationally on climate? And secondly, as you well know, climate has been a key part of cooperation between the U.S. and China. Will you try to replace that very important sort of intersection of interests with something else? Will you continue to do some technological cooperation on clean energy, for example, with the Chinese? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, this is a decision that was just made yesterday afternoon, and I think the President is going to engage both with domestic stakeholders. He mentioned in the speech yesterday he looks forward to talking to leaders in both parties about a way forward and reasonable ways in which we can engage in that. And then he'll obviously continue to talk to world leaders, but that's a process that has to evolve. What's that?
China, the relationship with China as a point of cooperation. Have you guys given some thought to how you'll manage? Because the model was you manage tensions with China as the U.S. government by having areas of cooperation, and this was previously an area of cooperation. There's obviously other areas that the White House is working on now with China, but do you envision some other cooperation on the area of climate with the Chinese government?
Well, the relationship that President Trump has established through President Xi has been quite remarkable. He's talked about it very clearly, and it's a model in which they'll continue to build their relationship and talk about issues, whether it's this or North Korea or other areas, economic areas, that they're going to work together on. So I think that the great thing about this issue is that the relationship that the President has and continues to build with President Xi is one that will allow them to move forward.
Thank you, Sean. In a recent statement by Senator McCain, he said that Vladimir Putin is a greater threat to the United States security of the U.S. than ISIS. Has the President had any conversation with you about that comment?
No, he hasn't.
Sean, thank you. Secretary Mnuchin has said that he wants the debt ceiling raised before the August recess, that we're going to run out of money by then. This morning, he wants it clean as well. This morning, Gary Cohn said that the administration is willing to do whatever with Congress to get it passed before August, and the Freedom Caucus has said they want spending cuts. So what does this look like? It doesn't sound as if the Treasury Secretary is going to get a clean bill. What's the administration willing to take as far as spending cuts to get the debt ceiling raised?
I mean, I think that was the nature of what Jen was asking, and I think that is a conversation that our team is going to have with congressional leaders and other stakeholders, Freedom Caucus and other members, about what it's going to take. I think there's a bipartisan recognition that we need to get that done, and so Secretary Mnuchin, Director Cohen, Director Mulvaney, and other members of the team will continue to work with congressional leaders to figure out what it takes to get it done.
Sean,
April.
Sean, could you tell me, how is the President dealing with the fact that there are several mayors, many mayors, from a bipartisan group, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who are against the President's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement? How does this President move forward with what he's saying about making coal great again and taking walking away from the economics of clean energy, and then walking out of Paris when you have mayors who are saying we're going to continue with the Paris Agreement?
Well, if a mayor or a governor wants to enact a policy, that's on a range of issues, they're accountable to their own voters, and that's what they should do. We believe in states' rights, and so if a locality, a municipality, or a state wants to enact a policy that their voters or their citizens believe in, then that's what they should do.
And one other question.
But I will say that with respect to elected officials, there was, I think, a large contingent of officials at every level of government that were very pleased with the president's decision yesterday and applauded him for that.
You have a bipartisan group of Republican and Democratic mayors who are very upset about this.
And we have some bipartisan support for it.
Okay, and last topic. There are numbers of reports on hate crimes. Nooses have been found at the museum, the new museum that the president toured, the African American History and Culture Museum. And also there was very negative word, one of the worst words you could say, spray painting on LeBron James' home. What is the president saying about this? Specifically, as people are saying over the last 130 plus days, people are feeling that there has been a divide that is perpetuated from this White House.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with the premise of that. I think we need to denounce hate in any form, in any act, and this president made it clear from election night to his inauguration that he wants to unite this country and move it forward. Caitlin.
Thank you. Did Secretary of State Rex Tillerson endorse withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement?
I'm not privy to the conversations that individuals had with the president.
Is there a reason he wasn't at the announcement yesterday?
I don't know.
Okay, secondly, can you clarify the nature of the conversations that Jared Kushner had with Russian officials and a banker in December? And what was the date of the meeting with the banker?
I cannot, and as I've mentioned the other day, that we're focused on the president's agenda, and going forward, all questions on these matters will be referred to outside counsel Mark Haskell.
But how can you not answer questions on it when the president himself tweets about it?
We're focused on his agenda, and going forward, all questions on this matter will be referred to outside counsel. Jill.
Reviewing his tweets?
Jill.
Two things. Firstly, nobody is actually responding to any of those questions, so I don't know where you guys are in actually finding spokespeople or people who want to respond to those. That would be helpful. Okay. And then two things. Do you guys have any update on the search for the FBI director?
As I mentioned yesterday, I guess a couple days ago, the president has met with some candidates. When we have an update on that, we'll let you know.
And then you said that you hadn't talked to the president yet about whether he still believes that climate change is a hoax. Would it be possible for you to have that conversation with him and then report back to us at the next briefing?
If I can, I will. Mary.
Given that you and Administrator Pruitt can't say where the president stands on climate change, does this mean that members of this administration helped the president make this decision to withdraw from the Paris Accord without knowing where the president stands, without knowing whether or not he thinks climate change is real?
My understanding is that individuals gave the president advice on the deal at hand, and he made a decision on what was best for the country and our people on the merits of the agreement.
Sean, we know that the president heard a lot of points of view on this, on both sides of the issue, and there was an impression, maybe a false impression, that it was a difficult decision and that he was wavering. In the end, though, yesterday, he was emphatic about getting out of the agreement. In the end, was this an easy decision or was it a close decision?
I honestly don't know. I mean, that's what the president is the ultimate decider, and when he comes to make a decision, when he gets the information that he's required, he lets us know that he has a decision and he announces it.
And one other thing, there's a lot of talk about renegotiation. Why renegotiate? The United States has the authority to simply reduce the targets. Why not just do that?
Because the president believes that it is in our country's best interest to renegotiate the deal.
The president signed a waiver yesterday that delayed his campaign promise to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I know you said that this was to not hinder any sort of peace deal, but how confident can his supporters be that this is a campaign promise that he's going to keep?
I think when the president signed the waiver under the Jerusalem Embassy Act and delayed moving the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, no one should consider this step in any way to be a retreat from the president's strong support for Israel and for the U.S.-Israeli relationship. The president made this decision to maximize the chance of successfully negotiating a deal between Israel and the Palestinians, fulfilling a solemn obligation to defend America's national security interest. But as he repeatedly stated his intention to move the embassy, the question is not if that move happens, but when.
But he promised during the campaign to do it on day one. I mean, is there a time frame now for when he will do this?
His ultimate goal is to get peace, and as I said, it's not an if, it's a when. Francesca.
Thank you, Sean. Following up on Caitlin's question, and then I have a second thing after that, is it still the administration's position, though, that Jared Kushner was in the meeting with the Russian banker as a representative of the transition, representing the president, the
As I
president-elect?
said to Caitlin, we're focused on the president's agenda, and going forward, all questions on these matters will be referred to outside counsel, Mark Kasowitz.
Something you may be able to answer directly is, does the president still have confidence in Jared Kushner?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sean. One of the ethics pledge waivers that the White House released applied to all White House appointees concerning discussions with the news media and was retroactive. Was that aimed at, did the White House have Steve Bannon's communications with Breitbart News in mind? Was that applied retroactively to address those communications? And any response to Director Schaub's claim that if you need a retroactive waiver, you have violated a rule?
Yeah, that's correct. There's two pieces to that that are important. One is, remember, this didn't have to do with the law or regulations. This had to do with the president's pledge, his ethics pledge. So he is the ultimate decider on that. This isn't with respect to a law or regulation. And that what we discovered was that several individuals on staff had previously worked for media organizations. And in order to continue having those discussions and advancing the president's agenda and priorities, it was important to make sure that all individuals had the opportunity to be able to speak to the media about what the president was doing to make the country stronger. For what it's worth, today happens to be National Leave Work Early Day. I hope you all get a chance to participate. If you didn't, maybe go home if you participated in National Donut Day and go home a little early and work it off. But with that, I hope you get to take advantage of that day. Have a great weekend. Thank you.